I'm your host, Patrick Newsom, and I'm sitting here with the one and only Michael McCarthy. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm taken aback by being called the one and only, but I'm good.
The only one I know, so I think that's accurate. That's still safe. You are the individual in charge of the Writers Lab here at IO. What does that entail?
Well, it sort of grew out of, I created 4 classes, actually at IO West, the sister theater to IO Chicago in Hollywood, literally in Hollywood, not figuratively, on the corner of, it's 6366 Hollywood Boulevard between Ivar and Cahuenga. And I started, I guess 2002 I started teaching at IO West, and I created 4 classes. They're called Talk Show Portfolio, SNL Sketch Packet, Sitcom Spec Script, and TV Pilot Presentation. And those are 4 things that literary agents will read. So my idea, basically what informed the classes was, what do I wish somebody had told me when I was starting out? And one of the things is what agents will and will not read. Literary agents will read talk show portfolios, Saturday Night Live sketch packets, sitcom spec scripts, and TV pilot presentations. And so why not teach that? And why not talk to agents and find out what they like? And so I did. I have an agent. He was very helpful, and so it became a curriculum. And so that's when I moved back to Chicago to marry Susan. I started teaching at the IO here, and then what I realized were there needed to be. One of the things I believe is, because comedians love to just talk, we're doing it now.
Yeah.
And so the idea is the reconciliation of your ideas in front of a live audience, so you can get to see what the real reaction is. So we came up with outgrowths of the classes. POV, a show you and I do every Monday, is kind of caters to a talk show packet, so the students can see how their stuff does. And then Monday Night Live is a sketch show we do every eighth Monday, every 8 Mondays we do. And then we stage talk show or TV pilots Saturdays 6:30 and 7 o'clock. So the students get sort of exhilarating or brutal feedback.
Right. I think that's invaluable. Whenever I pitch, myself as a stand-up comic, whenever I pitch to the stand-up world, it's easier to tell people like how great your program is to an improviser, but it's even harder to tell it to a stand-up sometimes, because a stand-up, they're in front of an audience every night, and they're getting that feedback, and they believe that they're ready and that they're done, and everything that. But I tell them over and over, I say, look, if you want to write for SNL, you want to write for the Daily Show, then this is not even just something you should take. This is something you have to take, because it will stop you from making all the mistakes that you make.
Oh, that's very insightful. Like that. I mean, and I made them.
Right. So somebody had to make them, and now you're telling people what not to do.
And one of the things is I'm codifying it into this. I don't know if it'll be a book or not, but I'm going through all. There's 8 weeks, 32 weeks worth of handouts per week, and so I'm codifying everything, which is a huge pain in the ass, because there's a great quote from E.B. White: frogs and comedy both suffer with dissection. And that's it in a nutshell. It's like and the way I came up, finally, my wife Susan helped me figure this out, was I'm just doing the assignments and talking about it, because initially I was kind of waxing philosophic, which was so pretentious I wouldn't show it to anybody, and then the other side of the coin was so self-effacing that it was useless. So this is sort of the middle ground, and so I'm writing these things as examples, and that's kind of added pressure. So, and I probably with the SNL stuff, I'll need to do a show of just that material to kind of see if it works or not.
Right, and it's very important. One of the things I think is most important about IO, and especially the things that happen here, and the people who, either if you're thinking of coming to IO or if you are a I could call it the best clubhouse in Chicago. Because you can go and you walk into the, or in my opinion, one of the funniest bars around, a bunch of people sitting around.
Couldn't agree more.
One of the things that I like the most about it is there's anybody can start a class and they can talk about this thing and they can talk about it as if they know what they're talking about, but the people here not only have done it but do it. So to the person listening going, well, what has he done? What is he, why is he qualified? Can you shoot out a couple of your credits so that?
Oh, okay. Well, I wrote for Saturday Night Live. I wrote for Sesame Street. I went through Second City, which means touring 2 shows in Second City ETC and 3 on the main stage. Then I was in Los Angeles for 19 years and both wrote and performed, including the Drew Carey Show, several pilots for Chuck Lorre, and then finally on staff for Mike and Molly. Lots of Comedy Central stuff, mostly writing in LA, but I did perform. I worked all the time as an actor too, back and forth, which is that's hard to do.
Yeah.
Because it's probably better to choose and go after one with white heat rather than trying to ride 2 horses at once. But it was very good. And I came back to Chicago in 2012 to marry Susan, and I'm an adjunct professor at Depaul, which I think actually informs the materials I'm writing, because it's good to have like you were saying about stand-ups, I'm ready. That's debatable always, but the idea of having one foot in academia, like classic academia, with
right.
Socrates and Aristotle's Poetics, and then on stage bombing or succeeding in front of an audience. I'm very grateful for that.
And I think that's the best. I think that's the best way to go. Is people, they find themselves looped into one thing. They're like, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I can do. It's like, but
particularly these days, my God, the fact that look at, you act, you improvise, you have a computer that suddenly will grow into a radio station, like
right.
Here, James Bond and Q wrapped in one.
I'll make my own watch that shoots poison gas. For people who don't know, talk a little bit about the writers' room. When we see writers' rooms on TV, that's one of the things I always see is this element of shows like Californication, or shows like, I don't know if you've seen what the new Judd Apatow on Netflix. I'm forgetting. I think it's called Love.
Oh right.
Yeah.
He's in a writer's room. Or?
Yeah. Well, he plays a tutor to it's Iris Apatow.
Oh right.
He plays a tutor to a 13-year-old on a show, but finds his way into the writer's room at one time. And every single writer's room is portrayed as essentially it's like this pack of hyenas who are, just, circling around the table with one,
It's kind of, it is.
Is it like that, or is it just,
do
writers just want to write about themselves?
Yeah. Well, I think comedy writers particularly, are prone to exaggeration. I'm so, I endured. I think that historically the worst writer's room was probably Roseanne the first couple of years. But from that staff came, they're all show writers.
Everybody.
Like Chuck Lorre, Bob Meyer, Bruce Helfer. These are all guys I've worked with. Joss Whedon I never worked with him, but yeah. The ones I've been in, they have ranged from great edifying experience to hideous.
Yeah.
And you just have to have a good sense of yourself. You're getting paid a lot of money, so everything you come up with is not precious.
Right.
It's not. Sometimes it is precious, and that makes it not worth doing. But particularly young writers who take everything personal, and in their minds they have written this romantic comedy where they have the last word. And the truth is, the way a writer's room works is if you have a showrunner, and this took me a while to learn, because I was that gifted child, and I did all of it. I was mostly, my stock in trade was being hurt, which is useless. So, but what you have to do when you're on you're a writer on a TV show is kind of crawl inside the showrunner's head and give them solutions to problems they're having. Like that's, come up with stories that they would come up with. They have basically hired an extension of themselves. They've seen something in you that they like. So you need to kind of quietly figure out what that is and come up with alternatives that aren't too alternative. It's a very, very gentle dance. I don't know if it's entirely always the best way to go. England does 1 or 2 writers and they do 6 episodes.
Right.
That might be, but like a staff, a lot of times it's just, comedy is very personal and comedians for the most part tend to be somewhat, particularly when you risk something that is personal, that it's hard to kind of take it back. But my advice is get over yourself. I think that's the really healthy thing, is the idea of like, don't hang on to something too long.
In your opinion, what's harder to work for? Is it harder to work for a showrunner like Chuck Lorre, he's just that, or somehow this stand-up comic like a Seinfeld or a Roseanne, who someone said, you know what, your thing is what we want, and now they're in the writer's room and they're.
I see
what do you think is what's harder to work for?
I would. This will sound maybe not consistent with. I think Chuck is. First off, I always got along with him. Still do. See him from time to time. I like leadership. Even if I don't agree with it, at least there's
right. At least there's something.
And the endless debating about, this way or that way or this way. And my experience with, my favorite experience with Chuck was this pilot for Jim Belushi, of all people, which was 6 months basically seeing him every day. And I learned a shitload. Like, I have to factor that into everything. And to be a showrunner is a weird combination of businessman, artist, first and foremost, particularly if you got there through writing. So artist, writer, businessman, because you're dealing with millions of dollars a week, therapist, psychologist, bartender, like the idea, and also you're dealing with the network, you're dealing with the studio, you're dealing with the talents, agents, you're dealing with a writing staff who never feel they're all geniuses and they're not appreciated. So it's kind of it's very hard. And a lot of times, my feeling is that maybe writers aren't built for running that small business. Mentally, if you've spent 20 years squirreled away typing, that maybe you're not able to fire people and not, there's a lot of business stuff that.
Or pitch an idea. That's the one thing I come into a lot of issue with, is we have these very artistic people who just don't understand why they have to go through the dog and pony show to get their stuff. Even from an aspect of the Comedy Shrine, running the Comedy Shrine, was I came from a stand-up background, and people thought when I got that job, they're like, this is gonna be great. I'm gonna call Patrick and get my showcase up, and I'm gonna get that. And which they were able to, because a lot of times it's like they're good, but they hit an entirely different. It's like they were in an entirely different world when I turned around and said, it's not making any money.
Right.
And
well, that's the thing. That's what I love about a live audience, is that all those academic or vanity-ridden things go away because the evidence is. To me, that there, and if you're like arguing with a showrunner, it tends to be kind of lose-lose. Like the idea is, and what a lot of times my experience, I think I grew as a person because I kind of went, this is tiny. This is a blip on their radar. It's a big deal to me to get my dick joke in the show or whatever it was, but it really, like, they have it's not personal.
Right.
But like what you were saying about people thinking, oh well, I can, Patrick will get me a slot on Friday or something. I tend to think The people that succeed are the ones that humble themselves to the process. Meaning, I think the key is to make friends with never being done. Like, you're not finished.
Right.
Like, particularly, and the arrogance I find with improvisers and stand-ups when it comes to acting, and they don't take acting classes.
Right.
And they're, which means they're bad. Like, I've dealt with both sides of the table. I've auditioned people and I've auditioned, and you know, it's not innovative if you can't. Like, basically, TV and film acting is doing the same thing over and over with subtle variations.
Right. With whatever the director needs.
And like improvisers and stand-ups, they don't know how to do that.
That's something I've run into more often than not. As myself, I went to American Musical Dramatics Academy in New York. So to be a serious actor and do serious acting things. When somebody in the short form aspect, when we do short form, and someone start yelling out genres, and someone yells out some theatrical, someone yells Beckett, and it astounds me how many times an improviser will turn to me and go, "Who's Beckett?" So we need who's okay. It's like, go home and read, and and get a bunch of different plays and everything like that. So it does come down to, because I've heard that before, and it's interesting that you say that and made a comment about someone said I should go take some acting classes, and that improvising teacher who maybe shouldn't be teaching says, oh, this is an acting class. It's not an acting class.
It's a style, but the thing is to just humble yourself to the process. If you want to do CSI, you're not going to, you should do more than just, be in the Coconuts on Thursday night, or whatever. That what I'm astounded, particularly more in the realm of writing, because I'm around it all the time, but just what people base their career trajectory on. The information is just silly, and so, I always advocate data, like up to the minute too, because it's always changing. I go through this thing with my students: sample, choose, focus, and commit. When you arrive in town, sample everything. It's absolutely. Then choose, say, improv, for instance. Then focus, like I'm going to do long form, and then commit is just do that. Mm-hmm. And I think people can fool themselves for years thinking that they're moving forward when they're just sampling.
Yeah, I had to, when I started here and started working with you, I used to do stand-up a lot more regularly. I was, in Wolcott, Indiana, at the bar where no one knew I was coming to, and then I realized how much of a stretch it was on the brain alone to be really, really working on this material, but at the same time engulfed in a whole thing that says don't come with anything, So it was very difficult. So in a way, I had to choose, and I chose.
Yeah, you always do.
Which
I wanted to be an editorial cartoonist when I was a kid, and you choose. You're the victim of your inability.
You are one now.
An editorial
cartoonist.
I've come full circle. But in terms of usable advice, I would say writers' rooms are an opportunity to. You kind of out of necessity have to figure out what's important to you.
Okay.
Like what pick your battles and all that. And also the improviser, the tenet of make the other person look good works really well in a writer's room. Like the idea of not necessarily, seek to understand more than be understood. Mm-hmm. Classic St. Francis prayer. Like those things, because you're, let's get it done. Rather than let me be understood and how funny I am. I remember Mick Napier said a very insightful thing. The guy who founded the Annoyance Theater. In rehearsal, he did not allow us to interrupt and tell long stories. And you'd be amazed how fast rehearsals went. Like that idea of okay, now we wait for 5 minutes to hear that story we've actually heard.
Right.
Particularly if you're in a writer's room, the thing about, one thing that I'm just now realizing is, the guys in high school or in college who were, the really funny guys, who've evolved into kind of the golf joke guys, the salesmen with the finger guns.
Oh, yeah.
those people are absolutely useless in a writer's room because they basically have a dozen jokes, most of them misogynist or homophobic or racist, and they just slightly retool them. And you burn through that like in an hour.
Right.
So so a lot of times, like a good comedy staff writer is fairly contemplative. He's not having the last word and trying to one up everybody. And I mean, there's that element, but I think for the most part, it's a lot of like, how do I make this better? Which involves sitting and staring and
Right, and rewriting, and that was the next thing I would ask you about is, how do you working on the project that we're working on now and everything like that is, how do you get to, you have to look at these people and say, guess what, it's not great, and you get to a point either that because you can't let them go, but how do you do that in such a way that it's either going to prompt them to stay, or tell them that law school is right around the corner.
Oh, that's well, my thing, like the funny thing about this book in quotation marks that I'm working on is I'm interviewing, not unlike this, interviewing old friends, some of whom go, well, it can't be taught. You're imbued with special, and I tend to think that's older white comedy writers, guys that I've worked with, who they're justifying their existence by thinking that. And then there's the Malcolm Gladwell thing about 10,000 hours. And I tend to think what happens to people who aren't Eastern educated, middle-aged white guys working on whatever, is those people, minorities, women, the people who are somewhat marginalized on writing staffs, those people get discouraged because they don't see their statistic or their demographic. And I think that's the thing. My experience has been with my students that I have seen hysterical people, hardworking, humbling themselves to the process in every single sex and ethnic minority. And so when you start to apply these somewhat eugenics-y type kind of things, I think it says more about you, that you want to believe that middle-aged white guys are the be-all and end-all, all of it. I mean, look at, the other thing, one of the other things, not to prattle on, but was it Joseph Friedman, who was the economics editor at the New York Times, who I remember reading that Noam Chomsky put him down and he said, I've never been censored. The New York Times has never censored me. And he said, of course not. You've been vetted. Mm-hmm. You have been selected because your point of view is consistent with this organization. That's sitcom. You have been vetted. You don't have
to worry about.
Yeah, it's not a marketplace of ideas. It's like everybody. So, I mean, you play that game for a while, and then it becomes insanely obsolete, and it becomes destructive. Like, my big beef about sitcoms is that, it's like mad cow disease. We've been eating and shitting out the same jokes for 65 years, since I Love Lucy. Apolitical, soft stuff that nobody relates to, nobody watches, because it's so jury duty, bachelor auction, stuck in an elevator, these ideas.
Husband's boss coming over for dinner.
Right. So, and the truth is, the newer shows, like stuff from England, like Catastrophe, like they're personal. Mm-hmm. They're actually drawing upon what they think is, and they also have the freedom of like Amazon or Netflix, and they're being invited to work at the height of their intelligence rather than, in development meetings I would always get, well, I get it, but those idiots in Ohio won't. And I'm from Ohio, and I would always go home, and my family would go, why is TV so stupid? Like, I don't know what the ghost in the machine is who they're protecting.
Right.
I tend to think it's, I think now's a really good time to be doing it because it's changing.
What's your favorite thing to watch? Is there something you don't miss? Because I know I figure you have a cot that you put up in the corner here, and then you sleep here. But is there a show that you? Because I remember you talked at one point in time about you caught up with Game of Thrones because you had all that game and everything like that. But is there something that's out there that you're just like?
I had a friend of mine stay with me, and she TiVo'd all the first season, and I got sucked into it. And I'm as cliche as a teenage girl with Twilight. I'm fascinated by it, and I'm 8 o'clock. I'm in front of the TV, like appointment viewing is what they used to call it.
Yeah.
One thing I watch every night is PBS NewsHour. I find that to be, that's appointment viewing. But I've watched all of American Horror Story. I love Catastrophe, like I said. I love a lot of the British shows. I'm kind of, maybe because of having worked in it. You were talking about Love. I saw maybe 3/4 of Judd Apatow's Love. Mm-hmm. I've seen some of the HBO series Crash, which I liked a lot.
And that was probably one of the truest. You look at these. Those
he did a great job.
He did a great job.
And he wrote about what he knew, and and so did the star. What's the main guy's name?
I'm blanking.
I loved his.
He had the variety show, or not variety show, but sketch show. It was Pete Holmes.
Pete Holmes, right?
Pete Holmes.
Yeah, the idea that he had this. There's one. I've never seen this on TV, but he went to a Christian school, and he was saying to his co-stand-ups, "I'm Christian, but I'm not crazy."
Right.
Which I've never seen that, because my general take with improvisers, particularly improvisers in their 20s, is everybody's an atheist, and they think they're being brave and unique, and it's just. So to me, that made me kind of go, hang on, this is, a little bit truthful. And then, Girls there were episodes of Girls that I quite liked. Silicon Valley, I think Mike Judge is the best showrunner working probably right now.
Yeah.
Just because I loved him making corporate intrigue accessible. Like, you watch that show and you walk away with, oh, this is how it works. And he wrote code for 2 years, I'm told.
Yeah.
So
yes, he was essentially the main character of Office Space. He was this guy that was just
right. That Office, and those movies are Idiocracy. All of them are great. And I think that
Idiocracy used to be funny. Now it's just kind of like.
I know. Yeah.
Now it's just kind of.
Veep too. Veep.
Yeah.
Like Julia said about. I can call her Julia because I worked with her at Saturday Night.
Oh no.
But she, what started out as kind of a dark satire is now an incredibly dark documentary.
Right.
Which, I think the thing. One of the things you and I are trying to do with POV is to sort of get something going. That's the thing. I think that more than ever, your own initiative is probably you can have the greatest effect ever with your own initiative now, which why not?
What is about? So you've seen the difference, through the I don't want to make it sound like the beginning of time, but beginning of your career to now. What do you like about what's your favorite thing that's changed that makes this job a little bit easier? Like, you still have to come up with ideas, you still have to do whatever, but at the same thing, but at least you don't have to anymore.
Well, I think since I I got a Second City internship, the first one in 1981, and I've watched over the course of 30 years, I know why religions go off the rails. Like, I know what happens. I've watched it. In the sense of ideas become rules, become laws. That there's this slow hardening of cement, and I think the thing that's become easier just generally is more people are interested in it, and that more people have a shorthand for what I'm talking about, and they're sincerely interested in doing good work. at least here in Chicago. It kind of wanes, or you rationalize some of it in LA, but there's pockets of really interesting things happening out there. It's too cynical to write off a city. I don't feel like, Woody Allen and Annie Hall, like everything in LA sucks.
Right.
Which I don't know if it did or not, but the idea is, I think you can always find some small cloister of people who want to do the same kind of good work that you're doing.
Right. All right. And finally, one thing I wanted to ask is, what's the craziest thing you've ever pitched in a room that you're able to talk about? I don't know.
The craziest thing I've ever pitched. I remember at 2.5 Men pitching the idea that a mudslide completely wrecked the house. Or they were mopping up. The episode started and everything was covered in mud, and they were dealing with
The fallout.
Yeah, and I remember Chuck Lorre going, "Yeah, we're not going to do that." But they were looking for something, and like every sort of producing entity, we want something really out of the box, and then when you give it to them, they go, "No, yeah, please." But yeah, let's see, have I ever done any science fiction-y thing? I once had an idea for a movie based on an entire race of frog people that were hibernating in a spaceship, and there was one frog that stayed up to protect them. You could push the button and wake them up, and he fell in love with the four tops. That they were flying around space and they got the radio signals of the four tops. Bernadette! And he just loved them, and he apparently took the spaceship to Earth and wanted to find them and sort of preserve them, and somehow their tone hit just the perfect strike. I forget what happened, but they all woke up or something.
All the frogs woke up.
But I just love the idea of
that movie became Passengers with Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah, and the rest is not history.
History. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me. This has been ESN Radio with Michael McCarthy. Thank you for listening.
Cool. Thank you very much. That was